Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the third of the anniversary talks celebrating Glamorgan Cricket's 100 years as a first-class county. This evening, we are focusing our attention on the 1960s, a decade which saw another championship title, back-to-back victories over Australia, and a move from the Arms Park to Sophia Gardens, as well as a host of other outstanding performances, which we're going to be focusing on. And I'm delighted that we've been joined by a number of the Welsh counties stars from this pivotal decade in the club's history, as well as the families of other Glamorgan legends. So it's a very warm welcome this evening to Tony Lewis, who led Glamorgan to their championship success in 1969. It's good evening to Ossie Wheatley, who captained Glamorgan between 1961 and 1966, as well as seeing Glamorgan to victory over the 1964 Australians. Again, a very warm welcome to Alan Jones, Glamorgan's legendary opening batsman who featured in all of these outstanding events during the 1960s, as well as good evening to Roger Davis, a member of Glamorgan's championship winning team in 1969, and the man who very nearly prevented Garry Sobers from hitting 6 6s. Once again, I'm delighted that we're also joined by Mark Shepherd, the son of legendary Glamorgan bowler Don Shepherd, as well as Stephen Hedges, the son of stalwart opening batsman Bernard Hedges. We're also once again joined by members of Wilf Wooler's family. Wilf, of course, continued to run Glamorgan during the 1960s. In fact, I think it's safe to say Wilf carried on running Glamorgan into the 1970s and into the 1980s, and also into the 1990s. And who knows, he's probably still running it from upstairs as well. And it's also a very warm welcome to Glamorgan President Gerard Elias, as well as other members of Glamorgan's board who have joined us this evening. So I'm just going to start by going into slide mode. I'll just ask Alan Jones. Good evening, Al. Can you see the slides?
Yes, I can. I can see them fine, Andrew.
Wonderful. So there we are, the Glamorgan team that won the county title in 1969. The Glamorgan team led by Tony Lewis. We can see there as well on the front row, Tony Caudle, Peter Walker, the great and late Don Shepherd, and in the back row, Ivan Jones, Brian Davis, Malcolm Nash, Lawrence Williams, Roger Davis, and also Majid Khan. Well, last time we looked at the 1940s and the 1950s and the impact that this man, Wilf Wooller, had on Glamorgan County Cricket Club during the post-war era. Of course, the 1960s saw Wilf transition from being a player to being the club's secretary, as seen here in the Glamorgan offices, which then were at number 6 High Street in Cardiff. And 1960 was Wilf's final year as a player. He'd appeared for Glamorgan in 400 matches. He'd scored 12,692 first-class runs. He'd hit 500s. He'd taken 887 wickets. And of course, if the umpires had listened to him, it was probably a figure nearer 1,500, not 887. Wilf also took 5 10-wicket match hauls, and on top of that, 392 catches. What big shoes to fill, to lose someone of that calibre, it took some doing. But as we're going to see this evening, as we go down memory lane, Glamorgan regrouped in the 1960s. They may have begun the decade without their influential leader, but they finished it with a county title as well as victories over the Australians. So first of all, we're going to look at Wilf's legacy. And here is the squad that Wilf had helped to shape. And it was a blend of youth and experience. Alan, if I could bring you in here, you had started your career under Wilf. So what was it like now playing under Aussie rather than playing under Wilf?
Careful what you say now.
They were two completely different captains, I can assure you. Wilf helped me a lot when I started playing, I must admit, and so did Aussie, because I had problems playing swing bowling, and I remember Wilf and Aussie bowling at me at the indoor school in Neath for a long period of time, for many, many days, and helped me tremendously towards playing swing bowling. Of course, Wilf was, I played under Wilf in his last year as captain, and our last game was at Nottingham, and he said that he would be retiring at the end of that year. But of course, he did come back to play later on in the 60s. As far as I was concerned, he was a terrific captain and a very, very good cricketer. And of course, Aussie taking over from Wilf was always a big ask. And Aussie got the best out of all the Glamorgan players in that early part of 1960s.
Thank you, Alan. There's one person missing from this photo. That's because he was actually playing for Cambridge University at the time. Tony Lewis, it's great to see you this evening. You also appeared, or you made your debut under Wilf. What are your memories of playing under Wilf, Tony?
Well, thanks for the slow delivery, first ball. We all have different memories of Wilf Wooller, who was somewhere between greatness and madness. I'm not quite certain on which day was which, because he was enthusiastic. He expected everybody to work as hard as he wanted to work, and we all loved playing. And some of us started off in the indoor cricket school in the winters. Alan particularly and I were always on the train and back again, and Bernard might be there. But more than anything at all, I think the 60s were, for Glamorgan on the field, were a mixture of Wheatley and Lewis, because we had long chats, we worked a lot together. I know Wilf always used to say, well, I'll put you right on this stuff in the championship. But in fact, it was Aussie and I wanted to sharpen up a lot of things we were doing on the field, groundkeeping, net practice, all sorts of stuff. And so, and his team, the early 60s, they almost achieved, they were always in the top few clubs. Took us there, and he deserved to win a championship. But between us, we got one in '69, and we were delighted to bring the cup home, so to speak. But it wasn't a Wooller style cricket.
No, we'll talk about the tactics. We'll talk about the way the game, certainly in the middle to the later the 60s, changed with the advent of one-day cricket. But just looking at some of the faces there in the Glamorgan squad there from 1961, it's standing almost head and almost shoulders above everyone there in the back row is Peter Walker. And of course, it was Peter who was part of a wonderful double act. I'm not obviously talking about Morecambe and Wise or anything else. I'm talking about the Court Walker Bold Shepherd double act. And there was certainly no comedy involved. And Mark Shepherd, who's on the call as well. Good evening, Mark. And without Peter's contributions close to the wicket, it wasn't just Don who benefited, but all of the other Glamorgan bowlers to have someone whose arms I read once were described, I should say, by one cricket writer as having telescopic arms. So, Mark, would you like to say a few wonderful words about Peter Walker as well?
Yeah, indeed. Good evening, everyone. Yeah, Dad could not speak highly enough about Peter. The best fielder he ever saw, best catcher, I should say, bar none. An extraordinary fielder, would get closer and closer, Dad would say, to the batsman, which was in itself disconcerting, but could catch sparrows, as he would say, you know. And was part of an extraordinary field inside. I think whilst Dad and Peter had so many catches, it ran through the side, and later with Roger Davis. But also, I think, not just close catching, Dad would say about Alan Rees, you know, as the best cover point he ever saw. And he saw a lot of cricketers in his time, that's for sure, Andrew.
Indeed. And here you can see, actually, this photo is taken from 1959. So it would have been Wilf's penultimate full season as Glamorgan captain. And you can see here the game at Lord's. I believe it is Shep who's bowling. And you can see this predatory ring of close fielders with Alan Watkins there, just at backward square leg. David Evans behind the stumps. We can see Gilbert Parkhouse at first slip. We can see Peter Walker at backward point. I think we can identify Wilf by his backside. He's on the left there. And Jim Presty, as well as another Glamorgan fielder at more orthodox point. But fielding was one of Wilf's mantras, which helped to clinch the county title in 1948. And the fielding was part of Wilf's legacy during the 60s and obviously into more recent times. But as well as the people that we've already mentioned, let's not forget that there was a lot of experience as well. And just to bring into the conversation now, Stephen Hedges, the son of the stalwart opener, Bernard. Good evening, Stephen.
Good evening. I hope people can hear me okay. My microphone's a little dim tonight. Is that all right, Andrew?
Perfect, perfect. Here's your father again, batting in that game in 1959 against Middlesex. J.T. Murray and Peter Parfitt also in this photograph. But your father, Stephen, enjoyed a wonderful season in 1961. Tell us about it.
Yeah, well, 1961 was a year in which there were a number of different firsts in cricket. It was the first ever tied test match. Australia and the West Indies finished dead level in front of a 90,000 crowd at the MCG. It was the first time Wisden's 5 cricketers of the year were all named as Australian cricketers. The first time Hampshire had won the county championship under their amateur captain Colin Ingleby Mackenzie. It was the last time that a county cricketer scored more than 3,000 runs in a first-class season. And those 5 Australians, 4 of them were from the touring Australian side: Richie Benno, Bill Lawry, Alan Davidson and Norman O'Neill. The 5th one was a Somerset player, Bill Alley, who scored 3,019 runs in that season. For Dad, it was the first and only time he reached over 2,000 runs, which is quite incredible if you think that there were only 6 Glamorgan players in the history of the county that have ever done that. One of them is with us tonight, Tony. The others were Hugh Morris, Gilbert Parkhouse, Alan Butcher, and Javed Miandad. So it was something for him to achieve. A couple of the highlights of that season, he spent the whole of the game against Northamptonshire on the field, scored 138 not out in the first innings and hit 95 not out in the second innings as Glamorgan won a comfortable game. He went to his 2000th run in the last county match of the season at the Oval, where another first took place. It was the first time Glamorgan had done the double over the London-based county. Scored 95 to reach the 2000 mark, and then celebrated by hitting Tony Locke for a 6 over mid-wicket to go to his 100. There were only 13 men that scored more runs than Dad that season in first-class cricket. Some of the names you will know: Ken Barrington, MJK Smith. There were 3 batsmen from the county championship winning side of Hampshire: Jimmy Gray, Henry Horton, Roy Marshall. And the others that made up that 13 were Jeff Puller, Norman Hill, Boris Hallam, Peter Richardson, Graham Atkinson, Alan Oakman, and Ron Headley. The final first that perhaps is worth mentioning, you've mentioned it already, it was Ossie's first season captaining Glamorgan. And although it was a great season for Dad, I think the team blew hot and cold. I think Ossie described them as being either absolutely brilliant or absolutely awful. And Glamorgan finished 14th in the county championship that year. Following season, 1962, Dad came close again to getting 2,000 runs. And he would have been the only Glamorgan player ever to have done that. Although Tony has, of course, done it in 2 seasons, but not consecutively. So, yes, 1961 was a great year for Bernard Hedges.
And your father formed a truly magnificent opening partnership there. We can see on the screen his opening partner, Gilbert Parkhouse. So could you tell us any of your father's, or share with us any of your father's memories of opening the batting with Gilbert?
Well, Dad was notoriously short of stories and reminiscences about his cricketing days. So I've been lucky enough to talk to some of the players who were in the side and watch them both. And I think perhaps one of the things that stands out most, obviously, is the way that they worked together as a partnership. And very often, if they were chasing runs or hitting runs quickly, it wasn't the boundaries that were the most important thing. It was the running of the ones and the twos that kept the scoreboard ticking over. I do remember somebody saying that Gilbert, when he came back in after an innings, wouldn't have a bead of sweat on him, whereas Dad was always covered in sweat when he came in after batting. So that was perhaps one of the differences between them. But they were a fantastic partnership together. Yeah, Dad really enjoyed the experience of batting with such a great batsman as Gilbert.
Now, I'll just bring Alan Jones back into the conversation here, because I know, Alan, in the last talk about the 1950s, you recalled how you made your first appearance at St. Helens as a substitute fielder in 1955. Glamorgan's game against the Australian tourists, and your hero Neil Harvey was playing. But Alan, you went on to the field wearing some spare kit which Bernard had left in the changing rooms. But later in your career, you also formed an opening partnership with Bernard, and your memories, Alan, of Bernard as a top order batsman.
Well, Bernard was a fine opening batsman, very courageous player. What you said earlier on, Andrew, was, yes, I did field against the Australians at Swansea. I think Bernard was one of the players that was off the field injured, and Jimmy Presty. And the first ball that I picked up on a cricket field was hit to me by Neil Harvey, the Australian left-hander, who was a favourite of mine. But opening the batting with Bernard was a wonderful experience. We got on well together. Bernard was a good puller and a cutter of the ball. And of course, I like to drive the ball through the covers, left hand and right hand. That made a huge difference, made it a little bit more difficult for the opening bowlers. But we had a good understanding with running between the wickets as well. I also played with Gilbert, and I think Gilbert was a magnificent opening batsman. And it was a privilege to have played with both Bernard and Gilbert Parkhouse.
Well, whilst we're talking about batting stars of 1961, and whilst we're talking about people who played against Australia, we mustn't forget the legendary Don Shepherd, who in Glamorgan's game against the 1961 Australians at Swansea produced a record-breaking batting feat. Mark Shepherd, I'll bring you back in here. Perhaps you could tell everyone about your father's remarkable batting exploits that day at St. Helens.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, it's not often we're going to talk about Dad's batting, that's for sure. And I know it'll bring a smile to some faces there. But yeah, he went in at Glamorgan were, I believe, 94 for 8 against Richie Benaud's Australians. And he hit 51 off 11 scoring shots, 6 sixes, 3 fours, a 2 and a 1. I'm not sure many of them would have been on the offside, I'm sure. And then when he was out, caught Bobby Simpson at slip off Richie Benaud. All he did was moan that he was feeling good. But yeah, I actually had the privilege of speaking to Richie Benaud much later about it. And he was always adamant there should be records for serious cricket and records when people are bowling dollies up for declarations, which are the few times that Dad's feat was passed, to be honest. So yeah, a very unusual feat for Dad, that's for sure.
And we mustn't forget that he actually came into the game feeling a bit groggy. I believe in the previous county championship match, I think it was against Gloucestershire at Anisang Harad Park in Pontypridd, I think he'd been hit in the face. And in fact, on the first morning at Swansea, there was some doubt as to whether Shep was going to be able to play. But of course, in 1961, unlike, of course, 2021, 60 years ago, there were no head injury protocols. And Shep, of course, didn't want to let Glamorgan down. He wanted to play. And the rest, I suppose you could say, is history. Well, thank you, Mark, for those wonderful words about your father's batting exploits. We'll be talking to you a little bit later on, I'm pleased to say, about your father's bowling exploits and the many times that he helped to bowl Glamorgan to victory. So it's time now to bring Aussie Wheatley, the man who stepped into Wilf's shoes. It's time to bring Aussie into the conversation. Good evening, Aussie.
Good evening. Good evening.
Well, what a galaxy! What an array of talent you inherited.
Well, yes, to an extent, I suppose. I should say at this point, when I first came to Glamorgan, who didn't really know the players at all well, I inherited 3 of the former great stars, really, in Alan Watkins, Jim McConnell, and Gilbert Parkhouse, of course. The sad thing was that both Alan Watkins and Jim McConnell were still capable of having the skills of cricket, but neither were physically very fit. So we weren't able to see the best of them. I mean, Jim had a chronic knee problem. Alan Watkins had knee problems and suffered badly from asthma. And of course, Gilbert was playing on one leg for about 3 years, so he could bat, but he couldn't run. And I'm sure Bernard would remember, no wonder he didn't take many singles. Gilbert couldn't run twos. They were all struggling there, but Gilbert played well, could bat brilliantly. He was one of the best players of quick bowling I've seen, and he was a fine player, but he really struggled in those first 3 years. So our problem really was in those years was to wait for them to retire and bring in young players, because obviously none of them were going to be part of a side that won a championship, because you need to have 11 people sort of on at full pelt to do that. So I came into a side which was obviously in a matter of considerable change. And of course, then we had to bring in a lot of young players, a lot of talented young players on the staff at that time. I mean, one of our problems was to translate them into the first 11, and to make them to first team cricket, you need the experience of playing, but you also need good facilities. And Glamorgan had always struggled with facilities. We always had very poor net facilities. That made it difficult for the second 11 players to get good surfaces to practice on. And it made it difficult for out of form first team players to get decent surfaces to practice on. So that one of the first things we had to sort of try and attend to was to get some decent nets. It was the problem, of course, that Glamorgan didn't own their own ground, so we had no control over the nets. The nets were provided by the Cardiff Cricket Club, and, you know, they produced sort of good club nets, but they weren't really first-class nets, and that was a problem over the years. So our players had to learn on the field. That was difficult, actually, because wickets in Wales are slower than probably in many other parts of the country. So particularly when we went to the south of England, our young players found it difficult to get runs because the ball was coming on probably a yard quicker than they were used to. So that took a bit of time to get over, but we had a lot of talent there. Some very good cricketers. Peter Walker's been mentioned, one of the absolutely great fielders of all time. Bowled either seam up or spin, batted well, particularly in adversity. Jim Presty, hugely valuable cricketer, worth, you know, sort of 13 or 1400 runs a year and near 100 wickets in my time, certainly in the middle 60s. Very sad to lose him when he went off to South Africa. And the side that developed slowly and became quite a decent side. I mean, we finished sort of, I think it was probably second in 1963 and third in 65. Then we lost poor old Prez, so we slumped back a bit for it. And we took time to come back into Tony's years when, of course, we had the advent of some good players in Majid. And, you know, the game developed into the championship side of 69.
We can see on this next photo some of the young players and the emerging players you mentioned on the extreme, standing on the extreme right, Ivian Jones, the gentleman next to him, David Evans, the
poor old Ivian's out of shot on he's like just here, yes.
Yeah, and also on the back row we can see Jeff Jones as well, who would have been, Aussie, I guess, one of your opening bowling partners when you first.
Indeed. Jeff came in, you know, quite one of those great natural talents, really, which you can't teach anybody. He had natural pace, and the sad thing was he was just coming into what would have been his best years when his arm went. I always suspected it was because he was encouraged by Caudle in the West Indies tour to bowl halfway down the wicket bounces to keep the West Indies batsmen quiet. I'm a bit concerned that Jofra Archer might have the same problem. You know, captains do like bowlers bowling halfway down the wicket to frighten the other side. And Jeff, you know, never got over that, sadly, because he really was a fine bowler and going to be a much finer one as those years went by, because he was about 27 when he packed up, something of that sort, you know. Really tragic for him, and a huge setback for the club, of course.
And another emerging talent also standing in the back row, third from the right, Iros Lewis.
Iros, yes, a boy of huge talent. I mean, he was a bit wayward in many ways, I have to tell you, but he was great fun. Moved off to Sussex, big spinner of the ball, and and he'd gone down very well in 2020 because he didn't used to move his feet. He just would stand there and hit it. That's what really they do most of the time these days, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, of course, you took over from Wilf, and of course, in typical Wooller fashion, Wilf didn't completely give up the game in 1961 when you took over as Glamorgan captain, because Wilf, for a season and a half, captained the second 11 and also worked alongside this gentleman standing second left Phil Clift, of course, another member of Glamorgan's championship winning team from 1948. And you can see Phil now in his role as Glamorgan coach, helping Hayden Bainan, who for many years played with distinction for Pontedillice. I've got a feeling, though, standing on the extreme left of that photo, I don't know, Roger Davis, good evening to you.
Good evening.
Is that you, Roger, on the extreme?
No, it's not me. No, it's not me.
Well, it's
so good looking as you, Roger, is he?
It's much too good looking for me, Andrew. Good evening, Aussie and Alan and everybody.
Nice to hear you.
What was it like, Roger, to be?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. What was it like cutting your teeth in the in the second 11 under Wilf, and being captained and led by Phil Clift? What are your memories of junior cricket, second 11 cricket in those years?
Well, I think I played my first second 11 game for Glamorgan, 1963. I was 17, still at school. Played at a place called Redford, Nottinghamshire, and Wilf was the captain on that day. I got a 50 or 60, so I was quite chuffed with that. And then went to field, and of course fielding is different in school than it is in county cricket. And I let a few through in the covers and got off the pitch and thinking I had quite a good day, and had the biggest bollocking of all my life from Wilf. And things didn't change after that, I don't think, really. But listening to Tony and Ossie, I think they were very kind to shelter me from Wilf in later years. They were their own captains, their own. They played the way they wanted to play, and good luck to them for that.
Well, thanks, Roger, for those memories, and I'm sure that there'll be many others, Wilf Wooller stories that we perhaps will come across a little bit later this evening. But 1963 saw an important change in county cricket, in that for the first ever time there was a competition involving all counties. It was the Gillette Cup. In those days, 65 overs per side, so 130 overs being bowled in a day. Of course, these days in county championship cricket, it's just 90, 96, and bowl 130 in a day.
It is now, Andrew, but we used to bowl 130 overs in a normal day when we were playing 3-day games. I mean, you're quite right. It's a disgraceful 90 overs an hour. You're quite right. That's the current rate.
90 overs a day.
Now, 1963, the Gillette Cup, as I said, was introduced, and this man on the screen, Bernard Hedges, wrote his name into the Glamorgan record books, because in Glamorgan's inaugural one-day game against Somerset at Cardiff Arms Park, he won the Man of the Match award. So, Stephen, I'll bring you back in now to talk through your father's achievements on that day.
I think it's probably fair to say that many cricketers, county cricketers at that time, didn't view what became known as the Gillette Cup, the one-day knockout competition, with any seriousness. They felt it was a rather a way for the counties to generate income, and they didn't kind of approach it in a serious way. I know Glamorgan on that particular day had left out Ossie and Don for the county match that was coming up afterwards. I know Tony, in his lovely autobiography, Playing Days, talked about it as being paper hats and red nose cricket. So the Glamorgan side that took to the field against Somerset included a number of new and young players, ones that perhaps haven't been mentioned so far. Alwyn Harris, Alan Rees, Brian Evans, Billy Slade, and Hamish Miller were all in the side that day. And Tony captained and decided that Glamorgan would bat, and perhaps very quickly was regretting that as they fell to 11 for 2. The opening bowlers for Somerset that day were Ken Palmer and Fred Rumsey. Dad came in at number 4 and joined Tony, and they slowly but surely put on 100 for the 3rd wicket. Glamorgan were pegged back again. Rumsey nearly took a hat-trick and took 4 wickets in 7 balls. And Dad basically nursed the lower order through, and they got to a score of 207 for 8. And I do remember Alan talking to me about this, perhaps the way in which Dad had recognised that even though it was a one-day game, it wasn't a slog, and that 65 overs was effectively a first-class innings, and there was time to build an innings. And so one of the things he perhaps did really well that day was to pace his innings. When Somerset came to bat, they were making a good head of things. They were 64 for 2. And then Tony decided to bring on his secret weapon, which was Bernard Hedges, the bowler. Dad had been a coach at the Neath Indoor School and was bowling regularly at that school to club players. And Tony knew that he could put it on a length and move it a little bit. And he felt that that was something that was needed that particular day. In his first 4 overs, Dad had 3 maidens, only 1 run, and had taken the 2 wickets of Bill Alley and Gordon Atkinson, who'd settled and steadied Somerset. Brian Langford scored 75, or put on 75 for the 9th wicket, the Somerset spinner, but Glamorgan won the match by 10 runs. And one of the new things that had been introduced with the Gillette Cup was the Man of the Match award, for which there was a £50 cheque and a gold medal. And I think somewhere, Andrew, we have a photograph of Dad receiving that medal.
Yeah, we do. What you very modestly said, though, was what you've failed to say was, in fact, your father scored 103. And before I show the photo of the Man of the Match presentation, there is Bernard running off Cardiff Arms Park with some delighted youngsters wanting to congratulate him after his efforts. And again, some of them gathered around. There he is with Charles Barnett, the former Gloucestershire batsman, receiving the first Man of the Match award.
I think what I like about this photograph is that Charles, Dad, and the 2 young boys who've managed to get in there, all their eyes are transfixed on the medal, which is, and if you see it in real life, it's a beautiful kind of got that golden allure to it. So forgive me, I'd like to read a little bit from my book, which is a quote from Gordon Ross, who was significant in bringing the Gillette Cup to English cricket, and ended up writing the history of it in the early 80s. And this is what he said about this particular day and Dad's performance. Here was part of the new cricket, carried off the field shoulder high at a cricket match. Naturally, you would have expected it at Cardiff Arms Park if Wales had just beaten England by a late try and enthusiastic Welshmen had borne their hero aloft from the field in triumph. But cup fever at a game of cricket? This was one of the early indications that the winds of change would sweep away some of the old and blow in the new. And I guess many of us may think those winds are now hurricane strong. But certainly it was one of Dad's proudest moments, and perhaps one of the few moments where he was a game changer and a game winner. So I think he was very, very proud of receiving that medal.
Well, you quite rightly said there the winds of change were blowing through cricket in the early 1960s. And if we move on to 1964, and we look at Aussie's team here, again, this is a photograph taken at Cardiff Arms Park. We can see the Westgate Street flats in the background, but the winds of change blowing through. The back row there showing some of the new breed of Glamorgan cricketers. One of the other changes, though, that I'm actually alluding to is the arrival of cricketers born and bred overseas. We'll be talking about Brian Davis. Ossie's already mentioned Majid Khan, but Glamorgan had their own overseas import there in the personage of Tony Caudle, standing there fourth from the left, born and raised in Barbados. Tony, like many of the Windrush generation, making their home in the UK. Tony, having started working in London, came to Cardiff to join his brother Steve, and passing Cardiff Arms Park, Tony looked in, saw the sight screens, saw the cricketers practicing in the outdoor nets. It reminded him very much of his days in Barbados. Tony, having had a fantastic debut season with Cardiff Cricket Club, signed a contract with Glamorgan and became part of quite a fearsome bowling attack. So Ossie, I'll bring you back in here. Your bowling resources then strengthened by the presence of Tony Caudle, known to one and all, Ossie, as Speedy.
That's right. He was a very handy cricketer, Tony. He developed well. I mean, looking at that side there, there's quite a young crowd, aren't there? Jeff Jones was also on his way in at that time, as he's not in that photograph. I'm sure he must have been playing quite regularly in the side. But it was a side that was developing, and there's quite a few people had opportunities. Billy Slade, who we lost last year very sadly. Ivy and Jones, of course, had taken over behind the wickets. Alan Rees, as you've heard, one of the best of ever of the, as you would expect of a Welsh outside half, on the best cover points of the lot. And it's a fairly consistent side, I think, in terms of we were always fortunate. We always had three spinners in the side, pretty unusual by today's standards, if you look at English cricket. And it meant that we had an attack which was well balanced and quite interesting to watch. And as I say, we used to bowl 23 overs an hour. So, you know, this business of 90 overs a day is quite shameful in my view, really. It robs the spectators about an hour's cricket. That's an old hobby horse of mine, so don't listen too carefully.
Well, this team in the photograph is the Glamorgan team that defeated the Australians at Swansea, the 1964 Australians.
No.
And you can see on the photo in the back row, standing fourth from the right, is Gwyn Hughes.
Indeed, yes.
Who,
later teaching, as you would know, at St. Paul's, I think. Went to St. Paul's to teach.
And he, of course, in 1964, the Australians played both at Cardiff Arms Park as well as at Swansea. And in the game at Cardiff Arms Park, Gwyn, I spoke to him a couple of months ago, and Gwyn was very proud to have scored 92, yes, batting for Glamorgan. And who knows, he could have been one of the handful of Glamorgan players to have scored a century against touring teams. But we'll be talking to Alan Jones in a few minutes.
That was pretty distinguished innings because it was a high-scoring game. I remember it because we used to play, if you remember then, from 11 o'clock to sort of 7 o'clock, a 6.5-hour day. And the Australians got a lot of runs and they were going on well. The normal form was to declare usually about an hour, half an hour to an hour beforehand, and give the other side, because it was a 3-day game, a chance to bat. And rather surprisingly, the Australians batted on through and got about 400 and odd. And I was a bit surprised then because I'd been keeping an attacking field and keeping the game fairly open. But I didn't discover until afterwards that the Australian captain had discussed the matter with Wilf, who encouraged him to bat through the entire day because the spectators come to watch them. But unfortunately, they didn't tell me, the fielding captain, who was supposed to be in charge of things. There we are. Just one of those things.
Well, I don't know if Wilf was part of the plan for the game at Swansea, because several of the promising young colts, several of Phil Cliff's highly promising second 11 team, then getting an opportunity to play against the 64 Australians, and I suppose, Aussie, the rest is history. The crowd running on to the outfield at Swansea after Glamorgan's famous victory, and there you are, standing on the pavilion balcony, making an impromptu speech to the crowd after this historic victory. What are your memories, Aussie?
About the only contribution I made. The real winners of the game were, of course, our two spinners, Don Shepherd and Jim Presty. It was a Swansea wicket, pretty good batting wicket, but it was a slow turner, which turned a bit evenly. We'd get runs on it, and runs came, and it was a well-fought game. And the final day was a real nail-biter because, of course, as the wicket got slower and slower as the game went on, it became more and more difficult to bowl people out, and we just scraped home. I think it was Alan. There was a brilliant catch. I think it was Alan Rees caught somebody brilliant. I can't remember very well, but it was a real ding-dong bat, and we, in the end, we scraped home. And I must say, Bobby Simpson was incredibly generous as the Australian captain, and it was a great day for Glamorgan cricket. And we were actually the Eisteddfod was down at Swansea, I think, around about that time, and we were received on stage there as heroes. A bit of a surprise to me as an Englishman to get on the stage there, but nevertheless, I was delighted to be part of that, and it was a great day for Welsh cricket. And I can't remember. I'm very bad at scores and that. We got enough runs, obviously, but the game revolved around Don Shepherd and Jim Presty, and I think they got sort of 18 of the wickets. Probably they might even got more than that. It was a great performance, and one long remembered. And the crowd, as you say, the big crowd used to get, we probably had about 10,000 people on the ground that day, which for a cricket match was a pretty good crowd.
Yeah, and here's a photograph someone gave to the club after the game. This is a photograph taken by a spectator sitting in the rugby grandstand at St. Helens, and you can see on the roof of the St. Helens Pavilion, you can see the temporary press box, the commentary boxes, because of course this game was also being covered by both BBC TV as well as radio. I'm just going to bring Mark Shepherd back in. Mark, were you present in 1964 at Swansea to witness your father's great bowling performance?
I actually, Andrew, I remember 68, 64, I was there, but too young to remember. But the 64 game, as Aussie alluded to, Dad and Prez took 19 of the 20 wickets. And the other one, of course, went to the other spinner, Iros Lewis. But exactly as Aussie said, Bill Lawry was gutsing it out and looking like he may win the game when he was caught by the magnificent fielder, Alan Rees. So it's not a game, that I remember. I know I was there as a family, we were there, but 68 was the one that I particularly remember.
Well, we'll come on to 68 in a minute, but whilst you're there, Mark, of course, Swansea was the scene of a remarkable bowling performance the following year. In June 1965 against Yorkshire, wherein the first innings of the game, Jim Presty took 9 for 43. And then in the second innings, Shep took 9 for 48. A remarkable achievement. The only time, I gather, in first-class cricket that one bowler has taken 9 wickets in one innings, and another bowler from the same side has taken 9 wickets in the opposition's second innings. What is even more remarkable, Mark, I gather, is they both hailed from the same village on the Gower.
Yes, Andrew, it's absolutely extraordinary, a sort of a fact that's gone unnoticed, but Dad was very proud of. Park Mill, you know, where I grew up, tiny village. I doubt if there was 100 people. And of course, Dad's family had the grocery shop there, and the Presleys, further up the road, had the bakery. And it's just an extraordinary story from Gower with no real or deep cricket in history, that these two would come out with these two spinners, you know. And Dad loved that fact, and I can remember him and Prez sort of talking about it and laughing about it, you know. But, you know, going back to the actual game, Andrew, you know, in Swansea in June against Yorkshire, I mean, I'm just looking at the Yorkshire side, which was Boycott, Paget, Sharp, Close, Hampshire, Illingworth, Truman, Wilson, Nicholson. And so there's people, you know, here, the Glamorgan greats were far better qualified than me to comment on that, but that's a terrific side, you know. And yeah, Prez in the first innings got 9, and there was 1 run out. And then Dad in the second got 9, and Prez got the other 1. Absolutely extraordinary game, you know. Yeah, and I wouldn't think that would have happened often from a small village like that, Andrew.
You're quite right, Mark, and of course it was the season before Jim decided to call it quits in county cricket. He'd had a benefit year. Let's not forget that Jim Presley as well had started off as a professional footballer with Swansea Town, and after his national service he then joined Glamorgan, and his career statistics testament what an outstanding all-rounder he was, achieving the double as well in all cricket. So Jim Presley's final season, as I said, 1965, he then retired and went to settle in South Africa. I gather, Mark, that he followed in your father's footsteps.
Yeah, indeed, Andrew. We had family in South Africa. My mother's sister had stayed out there. And in 1963, the whole family, the 6 of us, mum, dad, and the 4 children, went to South Africa and spent time, went to primary school in Rhodesia, spent 6 months between Rhodesia and South Africa. You know, Dad absolutely loved it. We had great cine films we kept at the time. And then Dad, you know, upon his return, really, I think perhaps planted some seeds, which we may or may not have been good ones. And I certainly know Alan had a great connection with South Africa as well. But great days when, you know, we'd go on the post office line on the Windsor Castle, the ship. And yeah, 6 months as a family out there during the winter.
Well, before we move on to the season of 1966, I'm just going to bring Tony Lewis into the conversation now. And Tony, have you got any memories of the 1964 game, the victory against the Australians at Swansea, or have you got any memories of Jim and Don bowling in tandem?
Well, I have, but honestly, it's sitting watching all the faces reacting to the different people turning up. It's like being back in a dressing room again. And I played with quite a lot of them. And it's been a great treat to see Glamorgan reach a point where it can be proud and not boastful, but proud of some of the antics in the past and games in the park. Yes, Jim Presley, seeing him there, I mean, he's a terrific guy to play with, a great scrapper, you know, very, very determined with the bat. Though I do remember him refusing to score 100 once against Kent, because he felt that David Sayer, the Kent fast bowler, I'd bowled too many bounces at him. So he got to early 90s, and then I was the other end, and I said, come on, Jim, we got you 100 here. I'm not getting 100. I'm going to refuse to get 100 because of circumstances who bowled at me. But, you know, it was a great team, and I'll tell you why. Because when we went on the field, Glamorgan, we played for Wales, not particularly for Glamorgan, in our own minds. Because all the, I would say there wasn't a sledging competition, but all the voices were English around, and we were determined to do it. We were a bit thrown when Aussie Wheatley joined us, but at the same time, I think he got the message that whatever brought the best competitive instinct out of the players, you press the button, which is why I got Bernard Hedges on to bowl in that Gillette Cup final, cup tie. I mean, the first one against Somerset. Yeah. Because I played against Bernard in the nets, and he could just dob it there accurately and make everybody fight for every time he middled the ball with the bat. But it was so close, the community was so close. Alan Jones and I've learned together with the school in Neath and the one in Cardiff, and batted a lot together in the early days. What I would say about the bowling of Jim and Don, wonderfully performed. But if you were joining Glamorgan in the 60s, you'd prefer to be joining as a bowler, not a batsman. The pitch was responsive. The talk of win the toss and see if the tide was in. There's a lot of mystery about it all. And not only did Don and Jim respond, but other spinners, but that brought Peter Walker the chance to demonstrate his extraordinary skill as a catcher and a brave player, a brave fielder. I once carried him off the field in Leicester. He'd been feeling short leg, and at Grace Road. And I could see what a fighter he was. I could go back then. He said, I can go back now. I want to get back on the field. So the spirit that underlay all of the efforts of all the players we've talked about tonight is the thing that stays with me most. He was magnificent, marvellous, and wonderful. Aussie came with new ideas and new thoughts, which sharpened it all up. And that's where I joined that. So I began as an amateur. My debut was in 1955 against Warwickshire. And that's, you know, I was 17 then. And going through to becoming a professional player, when we all had to become professionals, I joined the band. I've forgotten when that was. 63.
63.
Correct. Thank you very much. And so it was all a close brotherhood, really, Glamorgan Cricket to me, and a lot of talent and a lot of guts and a lot of support for each other.
Well, thank you, Tony, for those wonderful warm words about the Glamorgan atmosphere, or the atmosphere within the band of brothers within the Glamorgan changing room. Of course, several people have written to say Glamorgan born to serve not just a county, but to serve an entire country. And in 1966, it was Ossie Wheatley who led Glamorgan in their first ever county championship match in North Wales. Here's Ossie with the Derbyshire captain as the players gathered before the game, and to mark the occasion, here's the Glamorgan team in front of the pavilion, the changing rooms at Colwyn Bay at the end of the 1966 season. So you can see the stars from the south sitting in the front row. Peter Walker, David Evans, Ossie, Shep and Tony. And standing in the back row, we've got far left Bill Edwards, the well-known Swansea sports shop owner who was a member of the committee for so many years. We can see Alan Rees, we can see Brian Lewis, Tony Caudle, Jeff Jones, Ian Morris, Alan Jones, and a very young Roger Davis standing next to Jeff Gadd, who was one of the Colwyn Bay officials. You're laughing there, Roger. I did call you very young. This is 1966.
Yeah, I was 20 then. Yeah, I was probably wondering what I was doing there, really, because look at those 5 stars in the front. I wondered if I was good enough to be in their company. I mean, having heard Ossie, I only played a couple of years with Ossie as captain, but he started the revolution, and then played a lot of my career with Tony, who was a wonderful captain and man manager. Great made us a very happy family as a team. But then at that time I was very, very immature, naive, and clearly very worried looking at my face in the picture.
But you managed to find Colwyn Bay, or I should say Ross-on-Sea, okay. I know there have been over time there have been a few visiting players as well who've struggled to find the ground. But Aussie, if I could bring you back in to the conversation, how important do you think, and you can wear your sports council hat if you wish, how important do you think it is for Glamorgan then to be flying the flag for county cricket in the north?
This is me?
Yeah.
Oh, sure, it's very important. I mean, it was only 180 miles away from our home ground. Not too bad at all, really. No, the great thing about Glamorgan was it was very much, having come from Warwickshire in the Midlands, the couple of sides, Yorkshire and Glamorgan, are the ones that have a clear identity. And I've always felt it was very important, interesting enough, that it was a Welsh side. I was a great supporter of that. And one of the great joys of playing for Glamorgan was that clear-cut identity. And I have to say, further to what Tony was saying, we had an enormous amount of fun playing cricket for Glamorgan. It really was a marvellous team to play for, and a marvellous time to play cricket, I think, probably as well. So, yes, in terms of sort of the flying the flag, we went to a lot of trouble later on, particularly with the Sports Council, to set up the Welsh Cricket Association with the 8 county boards and persuaded county boards to put a lot of money into. And in fact, the Sports Council put a lot of money into. They built the initial development of the offices of the indoor school, and I think the biggest lottery grant we gave, which is about £3 or £4 million. And I have to say, the Sports Council did a great deal for Glamorgan cricket, and it gave the opportunity and background through the Welsh Cricket Association to develop the Welsh side itself, in addition to of course, the second 11. There's a great deal of opportunity within Wales for young cricketers to get into first-class cricket, and I feel that is one of our ongoing advantages, and one we should continue to take advantage of.
Indeed, and just looking at the Glamorgan team there in 1966, how many in that photograph were homegrown? I'm counting Peter Walker as one of ours, even though he was born in Bristol, raised in South Africa. Of course, he did have Welsh parentage and Welsh blood running coursing through his veins. So that was Glamorgan's first ever game in North Wales. As I said, the season 1966 was the last year that Glamorgan played at Cardiff Arms Park. Here you can see the front page of the South Wales Echo from January the 29th, 1963, when the plan for a national stadium was officially launched and unveiled, and in the course of the next few years, the Arms Park complex changed. I should say it is quite interesting towards the bottom there of the front page. You can see whether that's actually the first ever official mention of Brexit as well, from 1963, and a throwback there that Butlins was going to be in Barry by 1964. But of course, it had always been the dream of the Welsh Rugby Union to have a national cricket stadium, to have a national rugby stadium, and it had always been the dream of the WRU to have a stadium that the whole of the nation could be proud of. And of course, we've seen in subsequent years how that has been the case, and the plan for creating the national stadium led to the end of county cricket at what I suppose we could call the Little Arms Park. So here's Cardiff Arms Park as it was in those years. This is a photograph taken from 1963. It's actually the West Indies playing against Glamorgan, and we can see one of the fast bowlers running in from the rugby stand end to a typically predatory ring of close fielders. And this, for those of you who aren't familiar with the geography of Cardiff, this of course is now the home of Cardiff Rugby Club, Cardiff Blues, who are now reverting back to Cardiff Rugby. Well, let's just move on to that summer of 1966, because in the summer of 1966, the West Indies played at Swansea, and Alan Jones, it's a game that will be remembered for one of the finest innings ever played by a Glamorgan batsman against a touring team. You scored in that game at Swansea in 1966. You scored an unbeaten 161. And let's not forget, in those days, no batting helmets, just your sound eye, your good technique. And you were facing Wes Hall and Charlie Griffith, two of the most fearsome fast bowlers in world cricket at the time. So, Alan, your memories of that innings and that match?
Well, Andrew, before that West Indies game on the Friday, I was fortunate enough, we played Essex at Swansea, and I got 100 to win the game against Essex at Swansea. So I was in pretty good form going into the West Indies game at St. Helens. And of course, winning the toss and batting first was always an advantage. But you never fancy playing against the two genuine quick bowlers, Hall and Griffith. And it was very satisfying to come away with 160 odd not outs against that attack. As we all know, they were two very, very quick bowlers, and they played havoc with the England test side through that 1966 series. But it was very satisfying, and probably one of my better knocks against the West, against any side.
What was it like when they were running in? What was going through your mind?
Frightening, Andrew. Yeah, you've got to back yourself against anybody that bowls at you, and you always you don't really fancy playing against the genuine quick bowlers, but it's a job that you have to do. And fortunately, I managed to come through that day and score that 161. It was very enjoyable at the end of the day.
Well, another batsman to enjoy themselves in 1966, Tony Lewis. I'll bring you back in, because as Stephen Hedges mentioned earlier on, you had a purple run of form, over 2,000 runs and a double 100 that year. This photo taken though a little bit earlier in your career, not in 1966, and I'm not sure whether when you were facing the West Indies you were able to get onto the front foot quite so often and to cover drive there with aplomb. But have you got any particular memories, Tony, of the 1966 season?
I have. Before 66, I have to remind you that we lost a wicket third ball when West Indies played at Cardiff Arms Park. Alwyn Harris got bowled. I walked out to bat at number 3, and I said, "How was it, Alwyn?" "Devastating," he said. And I managed to nick 50, but nothing like the innings Alan played at Swansea, which I saw was marvelous. And you know, he did such a terrific lead for us. You can't build innings without a start. And he and Roger eventually developed into something that was much more important than it might have appeared on paper at the start. But it was great to follow them. Maybe follow Majid as well.
Indeed. Now, as I said, 66 was a summer of firsts and lasts. And for Aussie, it was your last season as Glamorgan captain. Here you are with, I think that's John Clay of Nottinghamshire.
That's right, yeah.
I think that's Rodney Parade, if I'm not mistaken, with the backdrop. But anyway, it was...
Yes, it looks elegant enough to be Rodney Parade, yes.
It was your last full season of county cricket. Just share with us, because I know you had lots of other interests outside the game, and share those with us.
Well, it's I only came here, in fact, down to Glamorgan in the first place because I had a job offered to me at TWW for a couple of years, and as television was just starting and I was working in advertising, that seemed a good opportunity. And I arranged to come for 2 years. In fact, I so fell in love with the place that I stayed on, as you can see, and I'm here even now. It was difficult, I think, and it always is difficult, and we frequently read of it these days, the difficulty of adjusting from playing the sport pretty well full-time to going back and finding something else to do in life. And I'd always been slightly preoccupied and had a guilty conscience that I shouldn't really be playing cricket all the time, and I should be doing something else by way of a career. That's not easy, and you know, it's always difficult to start up business, and I've done 1 or 2 different things, and some of them successful, some not so successful. But it's not easy, and I have huge sympathy for professional sports people packing up the game. And I always was a firm believer that young cricketers should have some other form of training, i.e. university or whatever. It's much easier these days to get that sort of help from universities. Some sort of training which they could fall back on when they stop playing, because it's a nightmare which catches up with people. And of course, they think the golden days are never going to end, and they end for everybody. I got out when I was aged about 30, having played very much longer, sort of 7 or 8 years longer than I ever expected to, purely because I enjoyed the thing so much, and I became involved in developing a Glamorgan side, which was great fun. And you know, I packed up then and went back into I had a wine business going then, which we did quite well with for a time, and various other things, but always kept an interest in cricket because I, of course, became heavily involved in the administration of cricket through what was the Test and County Cricket Board in those days. So I didn't lose contact with it, and it's always been a big part of my life.
And as I said, 1966, then your last full summer as a Glamorgan captain. Of course, as we'll see, as we move on towards 1969, it wasn't your last summer as a Glamorgan player, because we've still got a few highlights to cover. But it was the last summer for cricket at the Arms Park. The last Glamorgan game staged there in the middle of August 1966. To paraphrase Kenneth Wolstenholme, who spoke also that summer of 1966 with the BBC football commentator covering the England-West Germany final. Of course, his immortal words, "They think it's all over. It is now." We could use those words on Kenneth Worston home about Cardiff Arms Park. It was all over in 1966, and Glamorgan moving in time for the 1967 season to Sophia Gardens. There were a few teething problems. I think that's the politest way to...
yes, I'm sorry Tony had to pick up the ball at that point. It was a very difficult time to pick it up, I have to say. The wicket wasn't too good.
No, and we can see Wilf there standing second left with the MCC inspector of pitches, who was just making sure that everything was okay. And Tony, here we can see in this next photo, as the new Glamorgan captain, testing out the surface. And I'll bring Roger Davis back in, because Rog, I think that's you purveying your off spin, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I'm guessing, knowing the pitch then, that ball pitched and went straight along the ground, I would have thought. There was a huge ridge at one end of that pitch. I think it lasted for most of my career, unfortunately. But it wasn't the best of pitches, and unfortunately the nets weren't that good either. So we were finding a bit of a struggle at the new ground for the first 2 or 3 years. Got used to it probably in the early 70s, but I think they dug up the square in the late 60s, early 70s. But that was me bowling to Tony, yeah. It either hit me for 4, it went straight along the ground and bowled him.
Well, of course, in 1967, Glamorgan's opening first-class match there in May against the Indian tourists, and walking out to open the batting on the new pitch at the new ground, Alan Jones there on the left, and with him Alan Rees. So Alan, have you got any memories of that first match at Sophia Gardens, or indeed even those early years at Sophia Gardens?
Yes, I remember opening the batting with Alan against India at Sophia Gardens. Andrew, the trouble with Sophia Gardens was that they had problems early on with the drainage there, and they decided to cut a fence right across the middle of the square. and for Roger said for 2 or 3 years, I think it was for 7 or 8 years, it was an absolute nightmare to bat on that surface, because if the ball pitched one side of the trench, it would go along the ground, and the other, 18 inches away, they pitch the ball and it would go over your head, and then give it another yard further up and it'll come through nicely. So it was an absolute nightmare to try and bat at Sophia Gardens for the first 7 or 8 years. But I remember the game against India at Cardiff. The weather, when I look at that picture there now, it looks nice and sunny, but the day itself was a very dull day. And I remember it was Keith Jarrett played in that game, his first game for Glamorgan. But the ground at Sophia Gardens, I must admit, has improved tremendously. And when I look at the wickets there now, the square now, it's a really nice square to bat on. I only wish it was around when we were playing.
Well, we've got Tony to bring back in now, because here you are, Tony, your Glamorgan team from this team that played against Surrey at the Oval. That's where this photograph was taken. And Tony, still lots of experience sitting with you on the front row. Bernard Hedges, Jack, Ossie, Peter, of course, Peter Walker in the back row. But what was it like, Tony, to become Glamorgan's captain? The reason I'm asking you that question is I know very, very early on in your career, Wilf Wooller had told you that one day you would become Glamorgan captain. So was it actually preordained?
I don't think he was picking a straw out of a mug, really. Basically, I'd captained the Welsh secondary schools for 5 years. And there was a lot of cricket to play there. Played England every year. I played a lot of club ground, a lot of everything else. But I was an amateur, and I didn't see myself, well, a bit like Aussie, I suppose, playing beyond the chance of a proper job outside cricket. And so I went into broadcasting and writing and all the other things, and never thought of staying in the professional cricket world much longer. But, you know, it was too hard to give up sometimes, and all the boys were great. And I loved the life there. I loved the club. I don't know, but Wilf was a bit doubtful about it. He said, no, you better carry on. But you better go to my university first, just to get something into that head of yours. So I said, well, if that's what I have to do, that's what I have to do. So that's what I did. And I enjoyed it as much, you know, played all over the world and it's been great fun. Leadership is something that has to be more calculating. It's like running a business, I suppose. But when you've got people like Peter Walker making you laugh every day or cry, you don't quite know which way to turn. I found that the 60s really was a Wheatley Lewis combination in many ways, because I tore a couple of sheets from this book as well. And as far as I'm concerned, the support we've had in Wales has always been terrific. I'm not sure about the broadcasting, but I think the way to play it is play as hard as you can when you can. And as Alan says, every time you go out to bat, you don't think of failure. You have to think of success. And watching it all happen, I was happier later on to become the club's chairman and chairman of cricket as well. And I managed to sign a fellow who played quite a decent number of shots. They're called Vivian Richards. And I signed him up in West Indies. He thought I was inviting him to dinner. But that's how it worked. Because I knew, and you often know in cricket and professional cricket, exactly what item you need, what talent you need, who's to be called up, who's to train up. You know, I think, and I loved every moment of it. It's been great to watch, and I hope to see a lot more of it now.
Well, I'm sure you will, Tony. If I just before we move on to the next bit of the talk, there's one gentleman standing there in the back row, second from the right, whose career gradually came to an end in 67 and then 68. Yes. I'm talking, of course, Tony, about David Evans, a wonderfully gifted wicketkeeper. And I know that one of the hardest decisions you had to make as Glamorgan captain was saying to David that preference would be given to Ivian Jones. We're going to be talking about Ivian's skills in a few minutes, but Tony, could you just pay tribute to the wicketkeeper?
My only bias was to what I thought the team needed. I was a great admirer of David's, and he'd love to have kept going, I know, but that's one of the hard decisions that captaincy is about. And surely in 69, when we won the championship, Ivian's name comes to the top on many occasions. Especially with he's a better batter, of course. That was the main thing. But his wicketkeeping improved every single year. He's a great scrapper. So they both had merits, and we'd have, you know, who's to say who would have done best? But captaincy is not just putting a cap on.
Yeah. Well, we're going to move now to the summer of 1968, and boy, oh boy, what a summer it was, with Glamorgan defeating once again the 1968 Australians, and of course a certain Garry Sobers entering the record books with
Sure.
6 sixes. Here's an aerial photo of the St. Helens ground, the rugby ground in the foreground, the terraces and the pavilion, and that amphitheatre-like atmosphere that St. Helens possessed. Well, of course, I think everyone knows that in 1968, when the Australians visited, Tony, you unfortunately, through a combination of illness and injury, you weren't able to lead Glamorgan. So it was Don Shepherd who led Glamorgan into the field for the game against the 1968 Australians. I'm going to bring Mark Shepherd back in at this stage. Mark, it was the highlight. I mean, Shep's career, your father's career, is a glittering one, but I know on many occasions when I had the pleasure of working with Don, this particular game in 1968, when he set the touring team a target of 365 to win on the final day, this was the crowning achievement of his career. The moment that he looked back and thought so much about. Mark, your memories of that game, you said you were there.
Yeah, I was indeed, you know. I was young, but remember it well. And I can remember the huge crowd at the end of the game, you know, and trying to fight my way near just to get near Dad, really. But, you know, also Dad and I spoke about it so frequently, you know, and, you know, he always said how lucky he was with his captains, with Wilf, with Ossie, with Tony, you know, and I mean, he had such respect for his captains. But I suppose this was his little cameo, his little moment in the sun. Just one of those acts, you know, with Tony unfortunately being out, that one of those little things in life that come along and crowned it for him, really. You know, Barry Jarman's, I believe it was, Australians, played 29 matches here. And it wasn't like the joking practice games they became later. They came here to win and only lost 3 games: England, Yorkshire, Glamorgan. Obviously Glamorgan for the second successive tour. And as Aussie said, you know, that it seems that clubs with identity, and Aussie named Yorkshire and Glamorgan, do have this following, this identity, and they were 2 of the sides to beat them. And, you know, we can see the scenes in the photos. You know, I've got a photo behind me of Dad, you know, holding up a wicket from the game. And it was just a great moment. Yeah, a great moment, you know. And perhaps, you know, he probably wasn't a true, you know, a captain as such, but in fact, he only bowled 27 overs in the last innings, which most people would think is a marathon spell. But in the first Australian game, in the second innings, he bowled 52. So maybe captaincy made him cut down on his bowling. But great days, and Dad looked at it so fondly.
And of course, the famous balcony at Swansea, of course, after which the Balconiers are named. But there on the balcony in 1968, after Shep had spoken, Barry Jarman, also the Australian captain, addressing the crowd and starting his speech with those immortal words, "What's new about being beaten by Glamorgan?" I think his words almost got the biggest cheer of the day. And afterwards, lots of rejoicing, lots of singing, of course, in true Welsh fashion. Alan Jones, I'll bring you in here, because I believe that you had some friends from the was it the Pontedilais Male Voice Choir who came down and joined in with the celebrations?
Yes, they watched the game in one of the pubs in Pontedilais, and when Glamorgan won the game, Ivian went on the phone, and they all came down, about 12 or 13 of them, in a minibus, and had a great sing-song in St. Helens after the game. It was a great occasion. But it was also very fitting for, you know, Don Shepherd to be captain on the day. You know, the Australian batting lineup was a strong one, and I remember Brian Lewis, who doesn't get mentioned very often. He took 7 wickets for Glamorgan in that game against Australia, 4 and 3, and bowled magnificently on a turning wicket, obviously. And it was well, after winning it in 1964 and then beating them again in 1968 was a very, very special occasion. And this, you know, especially for me, because in 1964 I was out in Australia playing with some of these players and against them for Western Australia. It was very satisfying to beat them twice at home at St. Helens.
And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, of course, by 1968, the BBC TV's coverage of Glamorgan's games at Swansea were part of the transmission schedule. They were a fixture. And for those people who weren't lucky enough to be able to travel to St. Helens on that August day in 1968, they could enjoy commentary, led, of course, by Wilf Wooller. Most things, of course, in Glamorgan cricket and BBC TV coverage of cricket still being led by Wilf. Well, the cameras were there at Swansea capturing that great victory against the 68 Australians, and the cameras were present at Swansea at the end of August 1968, when another very special piece of cricket history took place. Of course, I'm talking about Garry Sobers on the left and Malcolm Nash on the right-hand side. And of course, it was on that particular day, the championship game against Nottinghamshire. It was on that day when the BBC were covering the game, although on this particular occasion, the live transmission had actually ended, but Wilf spoke to John Norman, the BBC producer, and said, I think we should carry on recording. There were some people, the technical crew of one of the TV relay stations near Bridgend, who decided to stay working. And had it not been for Wilf's insistence, the footage, which I'm going to show you in a second, the photographs of that remarkable over from Malcolm Nash, those images would not have been captured for posterity. But before we do that, I'm going to bring Aussie in to the conversation now, because I just need to highlight, Aussie, that Malcolm Nash, of course, everyone knew him and remembered him as a purveyor of left-arm swing bowling. On this particular occasion, Aussie, Malcolm Nash was bowling left-arm spin. Was that something he had learnt under your captaincy a few years before?
No, I can't claim credit for that. He was in very fine seam swing bowler, Malcolm, and particularly those few years there in that period. I think he always fancied himself rather as a bit more of an all-rounder and thought he would give it a go at the slow left-arm stuff. I think he might have been well advised to slide back into his normal deliveries for the last 2 or 3 balls myself, but there you are, a great sportsman, and he lived on it for the next 30 years.
Indeed. And here we can see a diagram showing where those infamous 6 deliveries went. Let's not forget that Nottinghamshire were moving towards a declaration and quick runs were needed. I gather that Garry may have been slightly frustrated by the earlier batsman and the slow pace. Don't forget as well that he was a left-hander, so the sixes numbers 1 and 2 disappeared high over mid-wicket. Delivery number 3 disappeared over the head of long off. Roger, I'm going to bring in you in a second to talk about that.
I thought you might.
Yeah, delivery number 4 disappeared over backward square leg. And then I gather from what Malcolm told me a few years ago, he decided to give the 5th ball a little bit more air. Roger, do you want to talk us through what happened to that 5th delivery?
Not really. I spoke to Garry about 4 or 5 years ago, and I said to him, I had a feeling you mishit that ball, the 5th ball. And he said, no, I middled it. And I'm pretty sure he didn't, because he hit it very high. And when he hit it high, not in the middle, it spun in the air. And I was all over the place. And all I was concerned at the time was, if you remember in those days, there was a brick wall, that end, the pavilion end, about 1 foot high, the pitch side, on the other side, a 6-foot drop. And my whole idea was I wasn't going to go over that wall. Not worry, if the ball comes to me, all I'm going to do is try and stay in field. And the ball, at the last minute, I think, because he didn't middle it, swung in the air, and I had to dive for it, and apparently I went over the boundary. I've no real proof, I have to say. But I've just, before you go on to something else, I'd just like to say something about Tony Lewis, who came in 67. I had a feeling that in 67 he was trying to put a side together to win something in the next few years. And I think he did that. And I think, to put things in context, Glamorgan came, 3rd in 68 that year, won it in 69, and 2nd in 1970. And if you remember in those days, county cricket, all the English test players played in county cricket. Every county played each other. And it was the start of all the world-class players coming in this country. So putting these 3 or 4 years into context, built from Aussie's days, it was a remarkable feat. And those 2 men have a lot for us to thank them for.
Indeed, and fine words, Roger. But if I just take you for a moment back to 1968, and we can see on this next montage, these are the stills from the BBC footage, and it's the one in the last but 1 row on the right-hand side. So it's frame number 20. We can see that. And we can see, there you are, we can see that wall you just mentioned.
Yeah.
The one thing, again, that people often forget is that, in fact, the MCC had brought in an experimental law in 1968. Had this game been played under the 1967 regulations, you take a catch within the playing area and fall over the boundary, that would have been out. But of course, with the new experimental regulation, taking the catch within the playing area, falling over the boundary, I must say, though, very gracefully, Roger, falling over the boundary. It was a 6, and I know.
You know, ask me again, Andrew.
I know that the 2 umpires, John Langridge and Eddie Phillipson, had to consult in mid-pitch before, to a lot of cheers from the supporters at St. Helens. They signalled a 5th set, and then we can see slide number 21 there at the bottom as Garry pulls the final ball of that over down towards, and high, I should say, over deep square leg, and the immortal words of Wilf Wooller on the commentary, and the ball's gone all the way down to Swansea town centre. A moment of cricket history, and as you rightly say, Roger, a moment that will never be forgotten. Well, we're talking there about Garry Sobers, one of the stars of international cricket But Glamorgan had their own overseas star by this time, Majid Jahinga Khan, a man whose father had been a student at Cambridge University under Wilf Wooller. And Roger, I'm going to bring you back in now because Majid hit the headlines at Swansea in 1967 with an innings of 147 against Glamorgan, and an innings which also contained a few sixes. Without, yeah, Roger, I think you were on the receiving end this time.
Yeah, I was clever enough to bowl the second ball wide, so I got away with the 6 sixes. Yeah, it seems to be following me around the 6 sixes, but yeah, he looked a great player, and I think, was he 18 then? And of course joined us the following year. A wonderful player. I don't think he realised how good he was, to be honest with you, but that innings obviously in 69 against Worcester to basically win us the championship was one of the greatest winnings you'd ever see on a very difficult wicket. But yeah, he had the makings of being a wonderful player at such a young age.
And here we can see the Glamorgan squad from 1969 in a photo taken at Sophia Gardens. Glamorgan were very lucky that year that there weren't any major injuries. Sadly, they had lost services, as Ossie mentioned earlier on. In 1968, Jeff Jones unfortunately had suffered an elbow injury, as Ossie mentioned earlier on. And of course, we mustn't forget Jeff Jones's contribution, not only in Australia in 65-66, taking 6 for 118 at Adelaide. We mustn't forget, of course, his batting prowess in 1967-68 in the West Indies, when Jeff blocked out the final over of the Test against the West Indies, blocked it out against Lance Gibbs to allow England to avoid defeat and to clinch the series. So we mustn't forget Jeff Jones's contribution, and in further anniversary talks in the autumn, we'll be talking about the impact that his son Simon had, not only on Glamorgan cricket, but on English cricket in general. But here we can see, as I say, the majority of the members of the 69 championship winning squad. David Wyndham Lewis, the Cardiff leg spinner, the only person not featuring in this photograph. We can see standing in the back row, Kevin Lyons. We can also see next to him, Brian Davis, Malcolm Nash, Tony Caudle. We can see Lawrence Williams, Roger Davis and Ivan Jones on the front row, Majid, Shep, AR, Peter Walker and Alan. Let me just go back, though, to the back row, because even though he had retired by this time, I gather Bernard Hedges actually played an important role in convincing Lawrence Williams, Lawrence, as I say, the player standing third right in the back row. I gather, Stephen Hedges, that your father influenced Lawrence to give county cricket a go.
Yes, I met and talked to Lawrence when I was writing my book about Dad, and Lawrence had a very good job. He worked for the council, and he told me he worked in the rates section, and at the end of every financial year, he said he'd carry about £250,000 down to the bank in a bag, and it was a job for life. It was a good job, and although he'd been performing well on a Sagaron cricket club, Dad had joined them as a club professional. They weren't a top side. They weren't in the sort of top tier of Welsh club cricket. But Dad, according to Lawrence, transformed the club, made them far more professional in their approach. And Lawrence felt Dad was the final arbiter in his decision to sign a contract and play for Glamorgan. And I think that there was no one prouder than Dad when he listened and heard about the 1969 championship winning side, and he was very pleased for Lawrence as well. So yeah, it was a nice way for him to contribute off the pitch to Glamorgan's success on it.
Thank you, Stephen. I'll bring Tony Lewis back into the conversation now. So, Tony, was there a specific plan in 1969? Did you sit down with Wilf and draw up a master plan for the year?
Well, you've read Wilf's book, haven't you? Basically, I didn't. I made the point, I think, earlier that when Aussie was there, we were always close and about the things that needed possibly changing within the club, and it was good fun for me to try and put some of those things into place. All the players, particularly my friends, but basically when you're captain, you have to take a hard look at what they're contributing day by day to the performance of the team. And it was a very happy time. We came in the third, first and second. We were top in the last year, 1970, I think. And Colin Cowdery's lot overtook us. They won 11 games on the trot at the end of the season. So we were that close to lose by the odd point. Malcolm Nash, I'd love to talk for a moment about him, if I may. Yes, have a go, Malcolm. Try and bowl some. Well, Underwood gets 160 wickets a year. He said, I can do that. And that was Malcolm. And if anybody's that convinced they can do it in professional or anything, go and do it. And it just was unlucky that, first of all, Knots were slogging for a declaration, and the slogger was Garry Sobers. Malcolm his confidence was never his enemy, it was always his positive strength. And he contributed massively to our run of success. Because the late in swing, he was getting good players out like Jeff Boycott, very sideways on, and Malcolm would dip with him. Barry Richards, a lot of good players, a lot of wickets. And then Speedy Caudle, when he bowled Tom Gravely when we left a very gettable declaration at Worcester on a funny situation day where it appeared I'd given them the best chance they've had of winning a match for months. And Gravely went into the dressing room and told all his team, right, you've got to go down to number 11 and try and whack these around. And Speedy comes in and bowls a beautiful ball, stayed in the air long enough to just do a little bit, came back at the seat, middle stump gone, and we got a bit surprising to us. But suddenly you realise that the intensity and the purpose was playing off. Also, you had to get 25 runs to acquire an extra bonus point. And to see Lawrence and Don Shepherd batting at the tail, determined to get on 25 more runs, was one of the educations in cricket, which was terrific. Shepherd in his early days would have tried to slog it. Lawrence, I don't know how he'd have played, but together they blocked and pickled and pushed, and won us extra points very valuably down the order. And so even the batsmen lying around were holding them. It was a very tense, very rewarding season 69, and I'm sure many like me will never ever forget it. It was not solved until the last game, but possibly one.
Indeed, and we mustn't forget as well that Glamorgan went through the season as this table here. This is a table from towards the end of the season. We mustn't forget that Glamorgan went through the season unbeaten. I think Lancashire back in 1934 had been the previous county to win the county title with an unbeaten record. But Tony, if I could just come back to you, and maybe Alan as well, there was a game against Hampshire, I think it was at Bournemouth, which had ended in a little bit of, well, I'm not sure whether confusion or controversy. Tony, do you want to remind us of that game, the Hampshire v Glamorgan game in 1969?
I can't really remember it because we've lived a couple of years together since then. But I do remember that Hampshire left the field and refused to play, and we took the points. And there was a huge fuss about that. I was called as captain to Lords to defend our position or claim the points or give them back. And we were doing so well by this time. This would be mid to late August. And who was it? Mr. Garry Allen was in the chair. All the county chairmen sitting round. This is a terrible situation. Why did Hampshire refuse to play? Because the umpires had confused us. They were changing down the boundary, and we didn't see that they could. Right. So I just said, with my guts rumbling, tell Hampshire, Mr. Chairman, they can have the points. And everything went silent. And I spent the next fortnight praying. And eventually we did land on top, and we never took the points from Hampshire.
Good. And playing cricket in the right spirit, and I'm sure the spirit of cricket regulations would endorse, Tony, your actions. Let's not forget again that in August, once again at Swansea, there were some important victories in August. First of all, against Middlesex, where Malcolm Nash, of course, we've been talking about Malcolm's batting, but sorry, about his bowling, but we mustn't forget his batting. Indeed, he played an innings which I think a lot of people thought at the time against Middlesex the game was dead. Glamorgan's title hopes were going to take a dent, but Malcolm got some quick runs. Ivan Jones also helping to weigh in with a 6 in the closing stages to clinch a famous victory. But if we're talking about Ivan Jones keeping wicket, and if we're talking about Swansea, and we're talking about 1969, then we have to go to the game against Essex, a game which had seen Aussie come out of retirement. Aussie, you were now, as you said, you were in the business world in Cardiff. You were obviously keeping fit and helping Tony out, and coming in to the game against Essex. And I won't ask Tony why was Roger Davis bowling the final over. I'll just ask Roger himself what he remembers of that final over, with Essex on a run chase, and earlier wickets had fallen. Any one of 3 results was still possible. Roger, when you came on to bowl, what were your thoughts?
Well, I was amazingly shocked for Tony to throw the ball to me to bowl the last over. It shows what a great captain he was, of course. He got it right, but we had 2 wickets to fall in 1 over, and with Gordon Barker playing well at the time as well. I think he got 30 or 40 not out. By chance, by the way, no one was talking to me then because they thought that Tony had made a terrible decision to get me to bowl the last over. Second ball, I bowled to Gordon. He charged and the ball turned. First time it turned all season, and Ivan got him stumped beautifully. And then, of course, the chaos at the end, the last 3 or 4 balls where Lever and East were batting together. And then, of course, Aussie came into his prime.
Yeah.
I mean, I had the man in the right place.
You did. It was third man and Aussie. Just talk us through the last ball of the game. Essex needing 2 to tie, 3 to win. You picked up the ball and talk us through what happened.
I think it was third man. I thought it was somewhere around mid-wicket or somewhere I was staggering around.
No, third man.
Third man, was it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Square third man.
I would say a pretty odd position to put a
For
third man for a slow off spinner. There you are. Just a point of interest. Any rate, I mean, Peter Lever and East, they were two comedians at the wicket for a start. And they decided that, I think it was the fifth ball, was it? That they only needed, I think, they needed 3 to win, didn't they? 3 to win, I think.
3 to win.
And there was a long single there.
Yeah.
I managed to get the ball into Ivian remarkably straight because I hadn't had a fielding practice for 10 years. And he whipped off the bails, and there it was. The game was over. And for some extraordinary reason, I was a fielding hero. I've never been anything like it in my entire life. They were very unlucky, I said. I said to the Essex boys, I thought they were very, very unlucky.
Well, there's the photographic evidence, Aussie.
He got 2.5 runs. There was a long one in it.
Oh, it's a long way out.
Yeah, John Lever there on the extreme left of this famous photo. You can see Ray's boots as he turned round, and an arrow-like throw, possibly the greatest run out in Glamorgan's history.
Exactly.
Well, I'm talking it up, Aussie. The run out, of course, covered by the BBC cameras, and Wilf commentating, and he had to apologise to the listeners for getting excited and nearly losing his voice. And then again, just like in 98, Tony's on the famous balcony at Swansea, addressing the crowds who are there, knowing that Glamorgan are just 1 win away from the county title. 2 more matches, Worcestershire at Sophia Gardens, and then Surrey at the Oval. Now I'm going to bring Alan back into the discussion at this stage, because the next game at the start of September 1969 at Sophia Gardens saw Majid Khan play probably one of the finest innings ever in the club's long and distinguished history. As the guys have said already, the wicket, the pitch, I should say, at Sophia Gardens had a capricious nature, yet Majid managed to get 156 batting against an attack which featured Van Burn Holder, and of course Worcestershire also had the great spin bowler Norman Gifford. Alan, you were lucky enough to be batting with Majid at the time. What are your memories of that?
Well, Andrew, Majid was a magnificent player, probably one of the best players that I've ever played with. And as I've said before, the wicket at Cardiff was awful on that day. And Majid came into bat, and I think second or third ball, he got hit on the forearm. And I went up the wicket to see if he was okay. And I said to Majid, are you all right? And he said, Alan, go away. So I went back to the other side, and he got 150 odd on a very, very bad wicket. Gifford was turning the ball square. Van Burn Holder made the ball lift from a length. And it's one of the better innings that Majid played for Glamorgan. And I can tell you that he played a lot of very fine knocks for Glamorgan while he was with us. He was a magnificent player. Do you know, Majid, I remember Majid playing down at Taunton against Somerset. And I was out early, and he got 190, 194 and 195. And I watched it all day, and I said to him at the end of the game, Majid, that was a magnificent knock, and I thoroughly enjoyed that. But I was a bit disappointed that you never got 200. And he said to me, Alan, I'll get one for you before the end of the season. And we went to the Oval to play Surrey, and he got 200 against Surrey. A magnificent knock. He was a great player. And that day at Sophia Gardens, when he got that 156, was one of the best knocks that I've seen from anybody.
And we mustn't forget that I know Roger Davis, you'd been hit and hurt batting in the game. Ivan Jones had also taken a horrendous blow over his left eye, and in fact later in the game, as we'll see in a minute, Ivan was unable to be behind the stumps, and Margid,
Yeah.
great all-rounder, was actually behind the stumps when Glamorgan clinched victory. But we mustn't forget that 1969, the game against Worcestershire, also was a landmark in the career of the great Don Shepherd. I'm just going to bring Mark back into the conversations briefly, because we're about to see a montage of the celebrations in the final part of tonight's presentation. But just briefly, Mark, this match, the second innings, as Worcestershire were chasing a target of 276, far too many runs as it turned out. But your father took his 2000th first-class wicket, and in time-honoured fashion, Phil Clift ran on with a bottle of champagne and a glass for Shep to celebrate, and a photographer captured the image. Mark, it must have been a very proud moment for you and the rest of the Shepherd family.
Yeah, indeed, Andrew. I mean, you couldn't write it, as they say, you know, to his beloved Glamorgan to effectively win the championship there, for him to take 2,000 wickets, just an extraordinary day. You know, it meant so much to him. Only 30 people in the world have ever taken 2,000 first-class wickets. You know, he took 100 wickets 12 times. He started the 60s with 133 wickets in 1960, 122 in 1961, and really maintained that throughout. But I don't suppose you ever believe you'll get to 2,000, although Dad probably did. But it was, you know, the script, it couldn't have been written better. It was just a great day, and a great day for Glamorgan, great day for Dad.
Let's not forget, it's Glamorgan having won the county title on 3 occasions: 1948 at Bournemouth, 1997 at Taunton, but of course 1969 it was on Welsh soil. A wonderful year for Wales, the investiture of Prince Charles as the Prince of Wales, and maybe another Prince of Wales having his moment in the spotlight as Don Shepherd claims the final wicket. Brian Brain, we can see on the extreme left of this famous photo, walking back to the Sophia Gardens pavilion, having been caught there. You can see Brian Davis with the ball. Malcolm Nash, of course, grabbing a wicket, and everyone returning to the pavilion. I'll just show you a selection of the images from this great day. We can see as soon as Shep had taken the final wicket, an embrace with Tony. So the captain and his able lieutenant, his wise senior pro, right alongside, hugging each other in this moment of great delight. We can see Roger Davis as well, happily restored after an earlier blow, also making it back to the pavilion before the crowds throng on the outfield. And then Tony, after a glass of champagne, the first of many, I know, with your team, there you are on the balcony at Sophia Gardens, saluting the crowd, and there they are below with Tony and Malcolm Nash alongside. and looking down on the assembled throng, as I say, taking in a moment of Welsh sporting history. There they are, with this scoreboard in the background, showing the story of Worcestershire's defeat. And we mustn't forget, if we just look over to the left of this photo, we can see the scaffolding, the gantry, where the TV commentary boxes were situated. And of course, high up in the commentary boxes, looking down, was Wilf Wooller, of course, describing the events and, to his delight, sharing in Glamorgan's second championship title. And here, the penultimate image for this evening, you can see Margid being interviewed by legendary broadcaster Alan Williams, Margid speaking to the crowd, and we can see behind Ivian Jones as well. The advice that had been given to Ivian was to go home after having been hit on the head, but Ivian wasn't going to go home. He knew that a moment of sporting history was about to be made. So those then are some images from a wonderful day in Glamorgan's history. And I'll just get our 4 members of the championship winning squad, our guests this evening, just to share their memories of that day. I'll leave AR till the end as captain, of course, but Alan Jones, your memories of those celebrations.
Well, it was a wonderful day, Andrew. You know, Glamorgan not winning the championship since 1948, and then succeeding in 1969. Very happy memories. But the one thing that stands out in my mind about that team, as Tony and Aussie said earlier on, it was a very, very happy side in the dressing room, a very happy dressing room. And as far as fielding close to the wicket, it's one of the best sides that I've ever seen. We had great fielders close to the wicket. You mentioned Peter Walker, but we haven't mentioned Roger Davis as far as fielding close to the wicket. Roger was absolutely brilliant, and a very successful year, and a year that I will always remember.
Roger, some lovely words there from Alan. What are your memories of that day and those celebrations?
Well, I think very proud, Andrew. I was lucky enough to play in a fantastic, happy side, as Alan said. We felt we were playing for Wales. We knew we were playing for Wales, a big Welsh crowd there. I remember the chants at the end of the game of Majid is a Welshman, and he loved that. He wanted to be brought into the Welsh feeling, as it was. But I look back, and a wonderful era to play in, wonderful day. The crowds are fantastic, and I made a lot of friends great friends amongst the players.
Were they Aussie? Were they chanting Aussie as a Welshman? I know as an Englishman, well, in fact, you are an adopted Welshman, I'm think.
Sure.
But Aussie, you must have been very proud as well to see the team that you had helped to shape clinch the county title.
Yes, I was, as diperoxide, I think I was christened earlier on. It's a great side, a very good side, very well led by Tony, full credit. It's always a great thing to win a championship like that. And a word about Don Shepherd, not all that Mark can say about his father. Don was a great guy to have in the side, a magnificent bowler, should have played Test cricket, bowled well any sort of wicket. That was the extraordinary thing they used to say about Don, or he plays on Turners in Wales. He bowled well when he went in the south of England, anywhere, on good wickets. He was a very, very fine bowler and a great guy to have as a senior professional. So all in all, it was a happy side. He plays a big part in that, and well done, Tony.
And Tony, the final word this evening from you, please. 1969. Well done, Diane.
Well, all I can be is express honestly the fact that we got to 69 through that decade, a decade of improvement in many things, fielding, thank goodness, improvement in the pitch at Sophia Gardens, but always we were aiming at the best 5-star in everything, and we certainly had it in catching. We had a wonderful opening batsman. We have tenacious players who enjoyed it, and a great crowd of support. I can't say more than that. It was a magic few months.
Indeed, and I think everyone on the call this evening will have been warmed by your memories and the memories of everyone else. And just to finish, of course, a wonderful year for Glamorgan, and images from a menu card, one of the many functions that took place. This is in fact the cartoon from the Daily Mail, showing see those Welshmen have hit us for 6 again. So combining with what had happened in '68, we can see the Hampshire fielder there with a black eye, slightly bruised maybe after what had happened at Bournemouth. But we can see current club's patron as well appearing there at backward square leg to you with Tony with one of your famous leg side shots. Well, I mention HRH because a few days later, in the office at number 6 High Street in Cardiff, a telegram came from Balmoral Castle, from Prince Charles, saying, "I'm delighted by your splendid win, especially in this particular year. Many congratulations. Do it again next year, Charles." Well, I regret to say that, Tony, you disobeyed royal instructions because you came second. But more about the 1970s in our next tour. As I said, this the final talk of the 2020-21 season. We'll be regrouping in the autumn when we'll be looking back on the 1970s and the 1980s. We'll have another evening devoted specifically to the 1990s, and then in December, another session looking back on the past 20 years. It's been a wonderful evening, but wonderful is the most appropriate adjective because it was a wonderful team. And I think this evening that everyone who has contributed has actually conveyed that wonderful team spirit that was present in the team that won the championship, and the wonderful team spirit that had permeated Glamorgan cricket throughout the 1960s. My thanks to all of the contributors this evening. Many thanks to Aussie Wheatley, to Tony Lewis, to Alan Jones, to Roger Davis, to Mark Shepherd, and to Stephen Hedges. It's been a wonderful evening reminiscing about a golden era in Welsh cricket and in the history of Glamorgan County Cricket Club. My thanks to everyone who's contributed. My thanks to everyone also who has attended this evening. And without any further ado, it's a case of, from me, Andrew Hicknell, it's a case of good evening, nos oitha.